Let's talk about the Lindsay Ellis video on Miss Rachel, which isn't really specifically about Miss Rachel. It seems to be more like her attempt to finally acknowledge the existence of Palestine. And I watched it the other day, and I mean, it was better than I would expect from like a big time, like old guard sort of bread tuber, but still not good. Still bad enough to the point that if this is what people think anti-Zionism is, then we're going to be getting another Gaza genocide within 10 years. And don't worry, I can explain myself perfectly well here. That's specifically what we're here for. It's like the sort of person, and you might have seen a lot of these people if you're familiar with like supposedly anti-Zionist movement. It's like the sort of position where you fundamentally uphold liberal Zionist beliefs, liberal Zionist framing, liberal Zionist principles, while still saying that you're against the existence of Israel as an ethno-state. But the rhetoric that you use is counterproductive to that end goal. So it's a bit iffy to be saying that about yourself and then not really sort of walking the walk, you know? So I got this comment that this is actually what inspired me to actually watch her video in full. It's like a 2-hour long video, so quite a commitment. Like I got this weird ass comment from a guy who said, "Hey, could you possibly stop harassing Lindsay Ellis for no reason? It's getting gross." And this was a comment on the recent main channel video I made about how the anti-Semitism crisis isn't real. And in that video, I included like a 3-second long clip of Lindsay Ellis saying that there is an anti-Semitism crisis. And that's all there was in this video. Like, she would just use as an example of people who are like even pro-Palestine people who are spreading the idea that there's this massive anti-Semitism crisis, this rise in anti-Semitism, based on no evidence. And then I go on in the video to show that it's just not true. There's not a massive anti-Semitism crisis. There's not a rise in anti-Semitism either, according to the actual data that's provided by those who claim this. This is the part where I actually mention her in this video. Actually, I don't even mention her. I just show 3 seconds of her speaking. Anyone to actually try and look into the evidence for these claims. Even many pro-Palestine people tend to just accept that there is this ever-present global anti-Semitism crisis as an uncontroversial fact that they need to specially account for some reason.
Because global anti-Semitism is rising, it is not helping anyone to deny that.
This ad is about obviously like anti-Semitic hate rising in America, which is very real.
One prominent recent example. Okay, so that's the extent of Lindsay Ellis featuring in this video. This is the only time I've ever mentioned her, I'm pretty sure, on either of my channels. Or I didn't mention her, obviously. It's just like this propensity that people have when they see a creator that they like being criticized to immediately declare harassment. And I guess that's cool because it means they can't actually refute what I was saying in the video. So instead, they just try to look for a reason to offhandedly discount what I'm saying, which is by declaring harassment, because apparently including a 3-second long clip of a YouTuber saying something that you then disprove in that video that you're making there is harassment. Like saying that this YouTuber was wrong is harassment. It's a very interesting phenomenon. So yeah, I've literally never mentioned Lindsay Ellis on my second channel, and I also haven't mentioned her ever on my main channel, because she wasn't actually mentioned in that video. There was just a clip of her shown. So I'm harassing someone who I've literally never talked about until right now, according to her fans. But when I saw that comment, like I was bored. I just got done like editing my next main channel video. And I was like, okay, I'll sit down for 2 hours. Or rather, I'll speed it up, obviously. I don't actually watch videos on 1x speed. I'll watch this video that people have been saying is like a lot better than like a lot of other bread tubers or old guard bread tubers on this topic, and I'll give it a review of it. Not like a reaction, rather a review. So this is that review. So I think like the video is decent as like a sort of overview with some extra context of like the Miss Rachel situation. So Miss Rachel is like this children entertainer who has been getting attacked by like all of the like pro-Israel lobby groups, basically for like acknowledging the humanity of Palestinian children. She's like a really like globally popular like children entertainer. And from what I know, she wasn't really political at all until she started doing this. And she's gotten a lot of shit for it. Unfortunately, they have successfully bullied her into like denouncing the resistance, deleting videos that she made of a Palestinian journalist and stuff like that, which is very disappointing, particularly because Miss Rachel is very independent. Her primary platform is YouTube. She's fucking massive on like kids' YouTube. So she doesn't really need to cave into this pressure. She's in a position like me where she can be a lot bolder without really facing as much consequences as a lot of other people can stand to be, unless they are willing to endure those consequences. Which, to be clear, isn't an excuse anyway. But it makes it more disappointing to see someone cave when they're otherwise right on what they're saying, and cave into the Zionist framing, like, of course I denounce Hamas terrorism and I want to free the hostages and I had to delete my video where I humanize a Palestinian journalist. It sucks to see someone do that when they're specifically in a situation where they make millions of dollars from their independent platform and they don't need to do that. Miss Rachel is in a position to absorb pressure that most people can only dream of. And it's very disappointing that she doesn't utilize her position for that. There are a lot of people who let themselves be bullied far less than Miss Rachel has, even though they are in similar positions where they can be bullied, or even worse positions. Like Javier Bardem is a good example. He's been speaking out about Palestine for 10 years now, endlessly. He's someone who relies on other people. He needs to get acting roles, to have a public profile at all, to get paid at all. Miss Rachel doesn't. Miss Rachel is independent. She's a YouTuber. So it's very disappointing to see her cave so easily on those points when she didn't need to at all. So that's just like the Miss Rachel thing. I'd imagine like her caving was a lot more to do with her just not wanting these groups to scream at her, which they're going to do anyway, than it was her like doing it for financial reasons, because I don't think her finances are really being impacted that much by the Zionist lobby, given how much money she makes on YouTube independently. But that's like my outline on the whole Miss Rachel situation. But Lindsay Ellis's video is not only about the Miss Rachel situation. It's more of like her big like magnum opus sort of video where she finally acknowledges the existence of Palestine. It took a genocide for her to get there, but I mean, she's still further along on that than most of these other big former BreadTube creators are. So as I said, this is a review. I'm not going to literally show you the whole video. You know, if you want to see if you agree with me or not, go watch the video. If I was to give this a rating, I don't want to give it like a star rating or anything, but as I said, it's somewhere between like liberal Zionism and like entry-level anti-Zionism. So honestly, it's probably better than most BreadTubers, but that's not a very high bar. Here's my problems with this video. One, she seems to be very annoyed with pro-Palestine people in ways that she would not be with people in other situations that are very analogous. For example, when she mentions the death toll, there's a very Zionist framing to it, and she specifically gets very angry at people who claim that using this death toll is the nihilist.
Why is Miss Rachel focusing so much on Gaza when there are Israeli children who've been taken hostage too, children in Israel who've been murdered too, and it's like, well, because of the numbers.
No, that's not the reason. That's not the reason at all. For one, there was a very small number of children taken hostage, and when they were taken hostage, what happened is it was either you take these children with their parents or you just fucking leave them there alone. That's the only reason that this happened at all. Two, there's no hostages here. These are not hostages, these are settlers literally living on ethnically cleansed Palestinian land. It's not the same thing. Israel, a settler colonial invading, power, bombing Palestinian children to smithereens, is not the same thing as Palestinian militants, incidentally, having to sort of take children with them when they take their parents prisoner of war. Because you have to remember, these are literally invading settlers on the frontier. Most of them are literally armed. There's a reason why they choose to live, not in Tel Aviv, but rather in Gaza frontier settlements. I have a whole video on this, the history of these Gaza frontier settlements, that explains how they were specifically formed there to be the first line of defense against Palestinians attempting to reclaim their homeland. Most of them are literally built on ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages. Most of them were explicitly founded as military settlements. The people who live in these settlements know why they are there. To act like it's just the numbers here, no, that's not it. The situations are also totally different. One of them is a group of oppressors, knowingly oppressing. The other group is a group of unambiguous victims. It's not just that more Palestinians have been killed. It's that these groups are in totally different situations, okay? This is like saying that the reason why the Nazis were wrong, massacring people in Poland, is because they have massacred more Polish people than the Polish have massacred Germans. That's not why they were wrong. They were wrong because what they were doing was wrong, because the situation they were in was one of a perpetrator versus a victim. It's not simply a numbers game here. So this is the video that I'm talking about here. October 7th, The Real History. On my main channel, if you want more information on this, it goes over the history of the Gaza envelope settlements and how you really cannot so unambiguously compare these two things as she is doing here. It's not a numbers game at all. This is an example of like the Zionist framing here. She doesn't really interrogate these settlements and these people who lived in them and why they were there. She just accepts the Zionist framing of these things as sort of being equal. They're not. They're not at all. Now, the great analogy here would be like Native Americans raiding a settlement on the colonial frontier, stolen from them on their land, versus the Americans genociding those people. Are these two things the same and comparable, and one of them is only worse than the other due to more people being killed? No, they're not comparable at all. Very Zionist framing here. Anyway, the rest of what she says here is very bad. It's much worse than that.
Sometimes numbers
Like, what she was saying there, you could plead ignorance for that. She's just not educated on the issue, okay? This next part is just really comes off as callous and disgusting.
are all we have to go on. These are some of the official numbers given by the Hamas-run Gaza Ministry.
The Hamas-run Gaza Ministry of Health? Why would you say that unless you're trying to discredit them? This is just the Gaza Ministry of Health. It's a legitimate health ministry of Gaza. Unless you think that these numbers are unreliable and they should be looked on with skepticism, there's no reason for you to mention Hamas-run. You know specifically what the implications of that are. There's no way you made a 2-hour video on Palestine and you said that without knowing specifically what you were doing. That's just kind of gross, honestly.
Health of children killed as of March 2025. And the reason that these are the official numbers is because this is the number that they have names for. These are confirmed named deaths as a direct result of Israeli action, although studies have shown that the indirect death toll is likely much, much higher. But then
It's not simply that, it's also that the death toll in general, direct as well, is also much higher because it's impossible to positively identify absolutely everyone, whether it's direct or indirect.
see people in the anti-Zionist movement saying that the official number of dead, which right now is in the neighborhood of about 60,000, is propaganda designed to minimize Israel's atrocities. And I'm like,
no, it's not propaganda, but specifically sticking to that when by this point there are so many other studies that calculate deaths in the way that you and others like you would usually accept unequivocally in other conflicts, like the Holocaust, for example. Only 4.8 million named dead, Jews specifically, have been specifically named regarding the Holocaust. Yeah, the estimate accepted by you, by me, by everyone else is 6 million. But if you saw someone saying that only 4.8 million people died in the Holocaust, you would be like, that's kind of weird. Why would you be saying that? So why do you get angry at these people for being angry in this situation here, in an exactly analogous situation when if you saw someone doing the same sort of thing for the Holocaust, you would peg them as a Holocaust denier correctly? What you're doing here is the same thing. Why would you say this?
do you know how many people 60,000 is?
Why are you angry at pro-Palestinian people for telling you not to downplay this by going with the lowest possible estimate?
60,000 is the size of a large football stadium.
And?
60,000 is bigger than my hometown. Who would think that 60,000 is okay?
Why would you say this instead of just acknowledging that the real death toll is certainly much higher? What is the point of this?
But 200,000 isn't acceptable. But then there's that problem of the vulgarity of numbers again. At what number is action mandatory? 60,000? 600,000? 6 million? If someone is not repulsed by 6,000 dead, they are not going to be repulsed by 600.
Okay, so what if someone was to do this about the Holocaust, Lindsay? What if someone else was to say, for example, that only 200,000 Jews died in the Holocaust, and, what does it matter if it's 6,000 or 6 million? What does it really matter? What's the difference? If someone's not repulsed by 6,000, not going to be repulsed by 6 million. So we might as well just say only 6,000 died, right? We might as well go with the absolute lowest possible rung estimate that exists. I don't think you believe that at all. I think in this case, you're just, for some reason, sort of preemptively trying to defend yourself against people, knowing that they would come at you for this, when you could have just gone with a higher estimate instead of the lower one. So the logic here doesn't add up because she wouldn't be okay with this in other situations. The logic here, it's just a very weird tangent for her to go on. It does not add up at all. Being accurate with the scale of the atrocity here is important. It's very important, just as it is with the Holocaust. What's the difference? There is no difference. And the fact that you're acting like there is specifically the problem here. It's very much a big problem. That's one issue with the video. It's like a very directly problematic part of the video. The other big issue of the video is that it's barely even about Palestinians. It frames everything through this framework of Jewish victimhood, of anti-Semitism. The video is much more analysis of anti-Semitism than it is an analysis of the genocide in Gaza. And that's so weird because the perpetrators of genocide in Gaza are Israelis. They are Jewish people of a Jewish ethno-state doing genocide because they believe that Jews are a superior race, and killing Palestinians because they are not Jewish. What is the history of anti-Semitism relevant to this, specifically to this event that you're specifically covering in this video? What is the relevance to this? One has to wonder if there's some sort of implication at play here that if you believe that you were descended by someone, or you are descended from someone who was oppressed 100 years ago, that means that we should look at what you're doing with less disgust, with less blame upon you for it. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't see why else you would mention this sort of stuff unless you do think that is the case, because historical Jewish oppression has nothing to do with present-day Jewish atrocities. Like, she specifically goes over the sort of history of anti-Semitism in it's about a 10-minute long segment, and she actually links Israel-Palestine down to like Jewish oppression from like Roman times and stuff, which is ridiculous. This conflict has nothing to do with that. This conflict is literally completely disconnected from that. I mean, calling it a conflict is a sort of slip of the tongue on my part. It's really not a conflict. It's a one-sided regime of ethnic, racial, and religious supremacy against a victim population who were there beforehand, who have been colonized and brutalized by this settler population. And, you know, she has a history segment. It's really not a history segment of Israel-Palestine. It's a history segment about anti-Semitism, about the history of the Jewish people, that paints them as like historic victims. You know, which would be fine if you were making a video about that, but this isn't a video about that. This is a video about the Gaza genocide, about Miss Rachel and her stance on the Gaza genocide. What's the relevance of that? Unless you're trying to sort of inject this idea that Jews are historical victims into a discussion of present-day atrocities being carried out by a Jewish state, by a Jewish supremacist state. It's led by Jews, its laws privilege Jews at the expense of others. The people doing the genocide are Jews. The people who support the genocide in Israel, they are Jewish. You know, it doesn't matter if there are Jews outside of Israel who don't support this, or even Jews in Israel who don't support it. It's still fundamentally a Jewish supremacist state. And to mention historical Jewish oppression, it really can only be taken as an attempt to sort of soften what's actually happening here, because it's totally irrelevant to what's happening here. Jews in Israel from the very beginning of the Zionist movement, Jews in Palestine from the very beginning of the Zionist movement, have always been in the position of colonizers, of victimizers. They make victims. They aren't victims themselves, okay? You're not a refugee anymore the second that you land somewhere else and you start oppressing others. That's where your claim to refugee status is gone, because a refugee is someone who seeks refuge somewhere to live among the people who live there, not someone who goes somewhere to supplant the people who live there, oppress them, and take over everything they have and ruin their country and ruin their lives. It's not the same thing. So there's literally no reason to mention any of this. The video has a whole segment on like Jewish history, a whole segment on anti-Semitism, things that are just like, the segment of anti-Semitism is really long, by the way, which is ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. To even mention anti-Semitism in this context of like a Jewish supremacist state massacring people for not being Jews, it can only be taken as a very conscious attempt to engender sympathy for this state and its people who are doing this genocide, and those abroad who support them as well. It's very much Jewish exceptionalist, right? People like this have a lot of issues accepting the fact that Jews are normal people like anyone else who are also capable of doing horrible things, that they do not have some sort of inherited victim essence because their ancestors were oppressed, and that they should not be treated with kids' gloves today. Those of them who are carrying out these atrocities and supporting them cannot and should not be treated with kids' gloves today just because of that. It really does seem like, for a lot of people, the worst part about this genocide is that it makes Jews look bad, or that people take it to make Jews look bad. Like, you see a lot of this stuff, right? It's like people who say, like the way that Adam Friedland, who is a well-meaning person and who probably is anti-Zionist, but who's just kind of dumb. I don't blame him for it that much, because I think he's just kind of stupid. But Adam Friedland was like, what's happening in Gaza makes me feel bad as a Jew, makes me feel bad about what Judaism means to me, or what Jewishness means to me and stuff. And it's like, man, is that really what this is about for you? I don't think that matters at all, man. I think what matters is that people are being fucking slaughtered here in droves. I don't think there's any sort of tragedy here regarding what this means for Jewishness and like how bad this makes Jews look and feel at all. You're not the victims here. The victims are the Palestinians. Israel-Palestine is treated by people with this sort of mindset as innately different to other similar circumstances where they would not treat it in this way, simply because the dominant supremacist group here is Jewish. And as long as these people go along with this framing, we're not going to fix the problem here. The problem, which is Zionism, which is Jewish supremacist Zionism, which is what causes this to happen in Palestine. If you cannot form proper analysis of this regime, which is no less disgusting than like a white supremacist ethno-state would be, just because it's Jewish, they don't get a pass, then you're going to ensure that things like this keep happening. And that's why I critique people like Lindsay Ellis, who say this sort of stuff, who use this sort of framing. It's not out of like a moralistic hatred of them as people. It's because if people are led to believe the sort of framing that they spread here, the situation is never going to be remedied. The problems with it are never going to be remedied. You are leading people into a Zionist framing. And if you lead them into a Zionist framing, we will get Zionist solutions. And the Zionist solution here is, at the very best, separation based on racial lines, no right of return, Palestinians and Bantustans. We can't accept this Zionist framing of like innate Jewish victimhood that needs to be mentioned in every sort of discussion about Palestine. This is a video about Palestine, about Palestinians, about the Gaza genocide that paradoxically spends like 80% of its runtime talking about how Jews are like victims of historical oppression. It's just very weird to do that. She also primarily blames the genocide, very much so, based on her focus on it in this video. Not on like the Zionist movement, not on like the people who actually carry it out, because, you know, they're Jews in Israel who do genocide, who support genocide, who govern Israel, who vote for the same Netanyahu government over and over and over, who vote for the opposition as well, who are also pro-genocide. Those people are Jewish, and it's very difficult for her to accept, based on the framework of Jewish exceptionalism that she has like just drilled into her brain, that those people are the ones primarily responsible for what they do. So she has a whole segment about Christian Zionism, which she sort of frames as the primary party to blame for this, which is not true at all. The primary party is the perpetrators themselves, okay? That's the facts. The primary party are the perpetrators themselves. They might be Jewish, and it might make you feel very weird inside to blame them for that because they're Jewish and because you have this sort of weird attachment to the idea that Jews are innate victims because of historical oppression, but this is the facts. That's just the truth here. The ones who are carrying this out, who are primarily to blame for it, are the Jewish people in Israel who support this regime of Jewish supremacy, this Jewish ethno-state and its existence, this settler colonial regime. Just because they couldn't do it without US support doesn't mean they're not the primary party responsible, because they're the ones who carry this stuff out. They're the ones who plan it. It's their project. It's not the the United States' project. The United States, like, opportunistically supporting them does not mean that the United States is the one that's primarily to blame for this. In other situations, people wouldn't say that. In other situations, like if someone tried to blame the US for supporting, like, a dictator somewhere who was doing genocide or whatever, someone like Lindsay Ellis, or maybe not her specifically, but similar people with her mindset, would be like, you're taking away agency from those people. But in this case, we need to remove agency as much as possible from the Israelis, who are the primary perpetrators of the genocide. It's not Christian Zionists who came up with the Zionist project, it was Jews. It's not Christian Zionists who have been primarily responsible for carrying out the Zionist project. It's Jewish Zionists in Israel carrying out with their own two hands. So this framing is incorrect. It's also totally incorrect as being the primary driver of American support for Israel. The primary driver of American support for Israel is not Christian Zionism. The primary driver of American support for Israel is just American foreign policy interests in general, which, yeah, there is overlap with Christian Zionists there, but that is the primary driver, okay? It's just Israel independently, because Israel isn't controlled by the US. The US does have coercive power over Israel, but it very rarely uses it. And the reason for that is because Israel has a very strong tendency, though it has been sort of pushing the limits on this recently, to independently do things that further American foreign policy interests. So Israel is supported by the US and enabled in what it does, but what it does is not dictated by the US, and certainly not by Christian Zionists specifically. Israel has a very high level of independence that isn't really equaled by pretty much any other American supported country, aside from maybe Saudi Arabia. When the US does dictate Israeli policy, it's on extremely rare occasions to say you're going too far. This has happened like 5 times total in history, and not recently at all. The US doesn't actually tell Israel what to do. What Israel does is dictated by the Israeli government, by the Israeli people, by the Israeli military, who happen to be Jewish. That is a fact. It's not the fault of the Christian Zionists, and I really don't like the way that this video tries to... It's like an exercise in making the creator and her fans feel better about the fact that they are having negative feelings towards a country of Jewish people, because they have been indoctrinated with this pro-Israel propaganda idea in the last 60 to 70 years or so, as long as it's existed, that has been spread where Jews are like this innate victim population who we always need to treat as like a special group of people. And thus Israel, by extension, needs to be treated differently. And obviously she has like this sort of innate belief, I used to have it as well. Most people who grew up in a Western society have this sort of belief in their heads about Jews, but it's specifically a pro-Israel propaganda narrative designed to make you like look at Israel differently, to not treat Israel as harshly as you would, say, a white supremacist country doing the exact same things. And this sort of framing where she blames Christian Zionists as like the primary culprits of Israel being what it is today, of Israel doing the crimes that it does, and puts literally zero emphasis on the actual primary culprits of it, which is Zionist Jews, specifically Israeli Zionist Jews, but also other Zionist Jews abroad who support them. She tries to blame Christian Zionists instead, because I guess it helps her to feel a bit better about the fact that she feels negative feelings towards a so-called Jewish state. It's just incorrect, misleading, misleads people away from what the problem actually is, misleads people away from understanding what's happening here, which is a Jewish supremacist state. It's a legal, institutional, systemic regime of Jewish supremacist settler colonialism. That's what Israel is. And this is misleading people away from understanding two things that are very important for them to understand. One is that American support of Israel is based on pure materialistic belief that Israel is good for American foreign policy interests. You might disagree with that assessment, but I think your conception of what American foreign policy interests are also very different to those who dictate it. They want the Middle East in flames. They want constant fighting. They want constant chaos. They want constant death and destruction, because the more death and destruction there is in the Middle East, the less chance there is of anyone fighting back against American hegemony. Okay. And pointing primarily to Christian Zionists is just misleading here, because the US doesn't support Israel primarily for religious reasons. The US primarily supports Israel, even in the Christian Zionists themselves. Most of them primarily support Israel for pure geopolitical reasons. That's why all of them are also like crazy neocons who support every other American imperialist action, okay? So that's the primary driving force. And two, it's just diverting blame. It's diverting primary blame away from the actual perpetrators. People don't think about this in other situations. Think about like the most relevant one to me, like the Argentine dictatorship, for example. In Argentina, people know that the US backed it. People know that it couldn't have existed without the US backing. But the primary blame is always still put on the military leaders themselves, the dictators themselves, the troops themselves, the people who did the crimes themselves, the people who instituted this systemic regime of oppression, not the USA. The USA is obviously to blame for it, because without it, it couldn't have happened. But it's not nearly the primary perpetrator, whether you're focusing on specifically in your video, while you also try to sort of instill this narrative in the viewer, this idea in the viewer, that the people of Israel who happen to be Jewish are sort of like innate victims by focusing very weirdly and for a very extended period of time on like an extended portrait of Jewish history, specifically that paints them as victims, that she ends, by the way, in 1948. Her talking about the history of like that led up to like Israel. It goes through irrelevant stuff, like framing the conflict sort of like as an ancient conflict, which it's not. It's a recent settler colonial conflict. But it ends in 1948. It ends on Israel's founding. The history that's most relevant to what's happening here right now is not pre-1948. It's not 2000 BC. It's actually 1948 onwards, if anything. It's mostly from like late 19th century, like the beginning of the Zionist colonization movement to today. But she specifically ends in 1948. That's very weird to do in a video that when you're giving historical context to the Gaza genocide, right? Because there's so much between 1948 and the beginning of the Gaza genocide that you never covered before, that you never talked about before, that you never really gave an inkling of your position on before. And you're still not doing it now. You're skipping over it entirely when in fact it's the most relevant historical context that you could have covered in your video. You should have covered in your video. In fact, you shouldn't have covered like the ancient history. You should have gone straight to like the like Zionist movement in the 19th century, maybe with like a brief mention of like historical Jewish oppression, and gone on from there and covered what Israel has done to the Palestinians from then until today, what Zionists have done to the Palestinians from then until today. That's the most relevant part of this. Like she literally talks about like the Arab conquests and stuff like that, and like Roman oppression of Jews and stuff, and links this to the modern Gaza genocide. There's no link there. It's irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. Why are you bringing this up? It's just a very disappointing video. And an important thing moving forward is that we are able to spot this sort of framing and correct ourselves on it. And my opinion is that people like this are not suited to make long-form content where they pertain to be going in depth on this topic. I'm all for them making statements. I'm all for them lending their support. I'm all for them posting on social media about this, calling it genocide, whatever. But if you have this sort of like liberal Zionism poisoned, framing of the situation, you aren't doing good by covering it in depth. You're doing harm. You need to interrogate that before you sort of put yourself forward as an authority on this, as she did in this video, as anyone who would make a video like this is doing by default. Because the fact of the matter is, the reason why we're here, the reason why the Gaza genocide could have occurred, is because of this framing of Jews as innate victims, is because of this disbelief that Jews could do things like this, that they're not like other people, that they're not just normal people who are also just as capable of anyone else as falling into an ethnic supremacist ideology that gives them benefits at the expense of others. That idea has enabled Israel to the point that it can brazenly do genocide, and the world does nothing about it. And she spreads the idea in this video. She takes away agency from people doing the genocide, from those responsible for this regime of ethnic supremacism in this video. And if we all believe in this framing, it doesn't matter if we declare ourselves to be anti-Zionists who are against the existence of a specifically Jewish ethno-state. It doesn't matter if we support a one-state solution with equal rights for all. You're not going to get there because your framing of the situation suits Zionism perfectly well. Your framing of the situation is what got us to where we are today. Genocide. This will keep happening unless you frame this in the correct way. And that's why I think these sorts of videos, as well-meaning as they clearly are very damaging, more damaging than they are helpful, particularly in the longer term. Because if we keep thinking like this, the solution that we will get in Palestine, as I said, will either be a Zionist one or no solution at all. And then the same thing that happened in Gaza is going to happen in the West Bank next. So is this video significantly better than a lot of other people's either lack of comment on this topic or horrible Zionist comment on this topic? Well, yeah, it is. But that doesn't mean it's particularly good. In fact, as I argued here, I'd say it's really detrimental overall. The framing is just totally off. The framing is going to mislead people into supporting Zionist solutions, you know? If you're convinced that Jews are innate victims who need to be given special credence and that historical oppression specifically needs to be mentioned at every turn, when we're talking about Jews in Palestine, in positions of ethnic supremacy, doing genocide in the name of ethnic supremacy, carving stars of David into the foreheads of their victims, then you are going to lead people into not having nearly as harsh, not nearly as coercive of a stance on this matter, on what needs to be done regarding Israel, as they actually need to have. And that's going to mean that we're going to get shitty solutions to the question of Palestine. One other thing to mention here as well, I don't know if this is 100% true. I do know that Lindsay Ellis is on Nebula, but Nebula sort of forced Second Thought out because he was too harsh on Israel-Palestine, because he had a proper settler colonial framing on Israel-Palestine. According to Second Thought, they tried to coerce him into making a both sides statement on the Gaza genocide, on Israel-Palestine, and he chose to leave the platform rather than make it. And there's absolutely a pattern of people from Nebula who, not all of them, I think Big Joel is on there, and he's a lot better than these other people. So it's not 100%, but there is definitely a pattern with the big time creators on Nebula, like Philosophy 2, H. Bomber guy I think is on there, that could be wrong, Lindsay Ellis, who have this very Zionist framing of the situation. And some of them who just outright refuse to say anything. And it's very suspect, given that Nebula, well known to have literally forced Second Thought off the platform for being too anti-Zionist. It's just a minor point though. I don't actually know if Lindsay Ellis is a co-owner of Nebula or anything, or just a Nebula creator, but there's certainly that pressure on her. That's also a reason why I was specifically very disappointed with Miss Rachel for caving into pressure, because she's not a Nebula creator. And even if she was, she makes so much money independently off her YouTube channel that she could easily dump them and just speak her mind. Miss Rachel is in a similar position to me. Obviously, she makes way more money than me and is way bigger than me, where she can say the right things. And it's very disappointing that she caves to pressure when she is in that position. The Nebula creators at least sort of have the excuse. Though it's still not an excuse. Don't be a fucking coward, man. They still have this excuse where they can be well, Nebula's forcing me to be silent on this, blah, blah, blah. That Miss Rachel doesn't have, which is why I'm way more disappointed in her for caving. Though, don't make no mistake, Miss Rachel is still way more based on this than these breadtubers are. Absolutely. Way better. Miss Rachel didn't say a single thing wrong until she got bullied into condemning the resistance, saying, "Free the hostages!" and deleting the video that she made with the Palestinian journalist because he supports resistance. Until that, in my opinion, she didn't make a single step wrong. It's just disappointing that she allowed herself to be bullied when she's in a position that she doesn't really need to be bullied in. But the fact that someone like Lindsay Ellis is finally talking about Israel-Palestine now, even if she's doing it in liberal Zionist terms, is nonetheless a slight positive, I guess, because the needle is clearly being moved. People like me and others, not to toot my own horn too much, are moving the needle to the point that we're sort of lowering the temperature on anti-Israel speech to now that people like this finally feel comfortable saying that perhaps Israel does wrong and bad things to Palestinians. They're not quite comfortable enough to properly frame the situation, but they're at least saying that now. 5 years down the line, they're going to be saying the same sort of things that I am now and acting like they were saying this sort of stuff forever, the whole time. So, some of us will do the hard work. You can take credit for it later. I don't really mind. What matters to me is the end result, as long as you get there eventually. And I will gladly bully you guys. I mean, they call this bullying and harassment. It's obviously not. This is critique. But I will gladly bully you guys to make you get there so that you can actually contribute something positive instead of being a negative to the Palestinian people and their cause. I'll do whatever little I can to get you there. Because unlike how things are for you, the most important thing for me isn't protecting my image in the eyes of people with Zionist sympathies. It's not keeping my Nebula contract. God, I'm just flabbergasted at that comment saying that I harassed Lindsay Ellis because I didn't even critique her. I just used her as an example of her saying there was an anti-Semitism, rise in anti-Semitism when there's not. And I proved in that video that there isn't. And they frame it as harassment. It's just so fucking bizarre. These people, like Lindsay Ellis is literally a multi-millionaire. She's a multi-millionaire YouTuber, and she claims that she's being harassed because, no, I don't think she's claiming she was being harassed. I think one of her fans claimed that she's being harassed, by me. The idea that someone like her is being harassed by a much smaller YouTuber, because that much smaller YouTuber used her as an example of people who say a wrong thing, or said a wrong thing rather, and then explained how that thing is wrong, is so utterly insane that you have to wonder just how impossibly narcissistic is it possible for you to be? What is even going on there? There's like this weird strain of people on YouTube who frame anyone responding to them and critiquing them as harassing them. And I get responded and critiqued a ton, and I respond to it, but I never call it harassment. You're a multi-millionaire with millions of subscribers, hundreds of thousands of adoring fans, and you've been lightly criticized by someone who knows more about this than you because what you're saying is ultimately harmful. Okay? You're a victim of harassment? Give me a fucking break. Learn to take an ounce of criticism. Learn to take what I'm saying to heart. I know you won't because you have financial interest in not doing so, but whatever. In 5 years' time, everyone will have always been saying what I am saying today. Not just because of me, obviously. I'm not even the main sort of person who's saying this sort of stuff. Firstly, it's Palestinians themselves who say this sort of things that I say here. Secondly, it's those who derive their opinions and disseminate what Palestinians themselves say, like the people at the Electronic Intifada, for example. Then it's people like me who build on the work that those people have done. I stand on the shoulders of giants, they say. In this case, it's true. And then long after that, long after like the Hassan Pikers will come through on this, long after like people who still aren't perfect, but are still nonetheless way better, like Hassan Piker, than Lindsay Ellis is on this. It'll take them like maybe 2 years to get to where I am. It's going to take Lindsay Ellis like 5 years, 10 years to get to where I am. And then she'll act like she was always where I am. I've been vindicated in everything I've ever said about Israel-Palestine. I was making videos about this half a decade before any of these people ever mentioned Israel-Palestine. They are worse than I was on this when I was like a little wee lad. And they're being harassed because I dare to very briefly say that they are taking Zionist narratives at face value when those Zionist narratives are false. And because I critique their videos on this topic. Give me a fucking break. Anyway, that's my dumb little review of the Lindsay Ellis video, which, as I said, between liberal Zionist and like entry-level anti-Zionism out of 10 is where I would place it. At least it's not as bad as a lot of other people's statements and videos on the topic have been. That's all. Lindsay Ellis has made 10 comments on BE on Blue Sky, but didn't use his name. All from a video that I made where she was mentioned. She wasn't even mentioned. A clip of her was played for 3 seconds. What is wrong with these people? It's absolutely unfucking believable. They have the thinnest fucking skin in the world. They have like hundreds of thousands of adoring fans, and they literally get like indirectly criticized by someone playing a clip of them and implying that it was wrong, and not even mentioning them. Aside from that they go on rants about these people on social media and frame it as harassment. What is wrong with these people, dude?